you're going into a new organization, take that time to ask the questions, to think about the things, and feel the pain of the organization and diagnose. Don't make changes in your first few weeks, right? Because it's going to be really helpful for you and it's going to smooth your transition.
Welcome to Productside Stories, the podcast where we reveal the very real and raw lessons learned from product leaders and thinkers all over the world. I'm your host, Rena Aleksen, CEO of Productside. Let's dive into today's episode. Today, I am joined by Aleks Bass, the VP of Product Management at Typeform. Aleks has a great career. Aleks, I think I would describe it as you've worked on a number of products that take qualitative data and make it quantitative. With your time at Qualtrics, Adobe, Momentive AI, that's that company that owns SurveyMonkey. It's just wonderful to have you here where we will be talking about product leadership, how to manage up, and how to make your first 90 days a success. Thanks for joining us, Aleks.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, well, why don't we get started and tell our audience a little bit about why you got into product management in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my career in consumer insights and research and was really fascinated by helping the businesses that I had been working for, answer key business questions and finding ways to use data, use information, use insights, use, anything from a statistic or a percentage all the way through quotes, perceptions, opinions, all of those things, and aggregating and sharing those to help businesses make the best decisions they can. And as you can imagine, when you start in one denomination of research, you kind of get exposed to a bunch of other denominations of research. And so one of my favorite projects was doing usability research for, ultimately DirecTV, which was one of the companies that I worked for, to reimagine what that online user experience would be on the website and how to integrate that into the experience that customers were having with their set-top boxes at home. And I just had such a fun time collaborating with product managers and designers and engineers and just a really cross-functional group of people to solve really meaningful experiential challenges for our customers that I really, couldn't go back after that. So that's what attracted me to product management initially.
So you fell in love with the customer problem.
Absolutely. And followed that customer problem all the way through into product management for companies that were ironically working on software for researchers. So that's really where that domain knowledge came in handy.
Yeah, well, Aleks, domain knowledge is definitely very important for product managers. However, it's not the only important skill for a product management leader. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So I think data came out earlier this year that the average tenure for a CPO is under 3 years. In fact, I think the tenure for a lot of product leadership roles is starting to go down. I think that's because the job is very hard. And there are a number of ways where product leaders coming into a new role, they have to solve 100 different problems. And so being thoughtful about where you start, I think matters for people in these roles. So I'd love to know from your perspective, and you just joined Typeform, how did you think about your first day on the job? How did you set that up so that you would be successful?
Absolutely. I mean, I think in order to be successful as a product management leader in any organization, you have to understand that this is new for you, but it's probably not new for anybody else that you're going to be collaborating with, in the sense that they have been working with your team. They have been working, they have an experience, they have an expectation. There's already a precedent set. So your goal coming in is to get a sense for what is the company strategy and get clarity around that. And then almost using that as a thread to pull on across the rest of the organization to almost look for inconsistencies. Does everybody know what the company strategy is? Are they consistent? Are there gaps, right? Because that's going to be an opportunity for you. You also want to build relationships and ask lots and lots of questions. And you may, I'll give you an example. I come into the organization of Typeform with a decent amount of domain knowledge, right? I've worked on SurveyMonkey, the product. I've worked in Qualtrics as well. All organizations that have a similar, they're in the same category, one might say, right? And so there's a decent amount of domain knowledge that I bring to the table. However, that's not how the team is going to perceive it when I show up. If day one I'm making suggestions, trying to make tweaks, trying to make changes here and there, right? They're going to perceive it as, you don't even know what we're doing. How are you able to make any changes immediately, right? Like, you're not listening for the real problems. So the other thing that I would say that's a tip is, if you're going into a new organization, take that time to ask the questions, to think about the things, and feel the pain of the organization and diagnose. Don't make changes in your first few weeks, right? Let's just put a little timestamp around that, because it's going to be really helpful for you. If you're able to take that time and have that discipline to just hold yourself back from making all of the suggestions that you think are going to be helpful to people. And it's going to smooth your transition a ton.
So, Aleks, going back to the first 90 days, one of the things that is challenging sometimes is coming in with some assumptions around how, not just how companies do product management, but even like the culture of product management, what terms they use. Have you found that?
There's a word that I'm sure everybody here uses called strategy. And I know everybody uses it differently, because I swear to you, how we define strategy is so personal to an organization. And one thing that I've noticed that feels like it's pretty systemic, of kind of a disconnect between leadership and the individual contributors on a team that are actually working on the things, is their understanding of what strategy actually means. And so what you might hear in an organization is, our strategy keeps changing. Our strategy keeps changing, right? It's almost like Chicken Little. The sky is falling, but it's our strategy keeps changing. And the thing that I've noticed is that there's nuance around when we talk about strategy. What is a strategy? To some people, a strategy is legitimately, this is who we're going after. This is the role we want to play in this market. This is how we're going to do it. This is the feature that we're going to build to do it. This is the way we're going to talk about that feature when we go to market. These are the places we're going to talk about it. And in some organizations, the strategy is really like, our objective is to be known as X, Y, or Z, and we're going to do that by solving X, Y, or Z problem. And it's up to the teams to figure out how, right? And so organization by organization, I think there needs to be alignment and understanding around, what does strategy mean to this organization, and providing clarity on what the expectations of the team are. So what we were able to do kind of at our annual company event is bring everybody together and say, like, look, the strategy hasn't been changing, right? The strategy has been consistent. Focus on marketers, give them the best capabilities possible to accomplish their jobs, which we've even narrowed our understanding of what those jobs are and the priorities of those jobs, and support them with the best-in-class tools that are designed first, right? Let's say some sub-elements of the strategy. And we actually ended up using this Lord of the Rings reference, right, where the group is planning on, going to destroy the ring in Mordor. And nobody told them how, right? Nobody said, you're going to go here first, you're going to go there second, you're going to run into these people, maybe take this path because it's easier. They had to kind of figure that out on their own, but they all aligned on the strategy as, we're going to go destroy the ring in Mordor. And they had to be flexible and pivot. And it's a really interesting example, because we were able to use that nomenclature to kind of, and that example, to really give the team a sense for what we were going to commit to, what was still open to be explored, and what the expectation of engagement was from them. And we were able to align on some of the ways that we talk about these things, because the strategy didn't change. We narrowed from marketers in general to a specific use case. We narrowed from marketers in general to marketers that are using certain tools, right? So the strategy was getting more and more specific based on the things that we were learning and trying and evolving and iterating on. It didn't change. And by the way, we actually want to work with all of you to create the plan that's going to get us to something that either works or doesn't work, or actually needs to change the strategy or needs to be iterated on. And so that was an incredibly kind of helpful element for me to reflect on, because, we think we know what these words mean, but, looking at 7 different strategy decks, I think you start to get the sense that people say that word, but we mean different things by it. And it's important to get a sense for, what does your organization mean by the words that you're using? Any words, right? It could be beyond strategy. It could be collaboration. What does that mean in your organization? Decision making. What does that mean in your organization? Right? Like there's these words that have value, that have meaning, that transcend, your understanding of what that word means in the dictionary. And so how can you get a sense for what that looks like within that organization and help shape it in the direction that you need it to go in order for you to be as effective as you can within that organization?
Do you have an example of like a challenge during the, challenge in terms of onboarding, which then presented an opportunity for you to make a positive impact?
One of the challenges that I noticed is that the customer, or the team, was trying to do their best in terms of being customer centric, but really weren't given the tools to do it. And we had very constrained research resources. And so it created an opportunity for me to collaborate with the chief revenue officer at Typeform. And we created this whole ceremony called the Customer Sync, which now has become one of our favorite
What
ceremonies.
was that?
It's called the Customer Sync.
The
And
customer thing.
so it kills 2 birds with 1 stone, right? The one bird is, we need alignment between GTM and R&D. We need to be aligned on what are the problems we're solving. We need to have communication about what's being worked on, and we need to understand what we're going to do differently together to either bring these things to market or to pull them back, or to, iterate on them, who to talk to, how to get feedback, etc. And so what we did is we created this customer sync that would essentially centralize all of the feedback that the GTM teams were having, whether it be sales. Why were we losing deals? Why were we winning deals? Customer support. What were the tickets that were coming in? What were the requests from customers? What was the feedback? The community, marketing, etc. So all of the teams would pull all of their context together and create, a deck for us that they would walk us through, that told us, here's what we're hearing in this domain, here's what we're hearing in that domain. And then the PMs would all attend, and they would be able to ask questions, make connections with those cross-functional partners so that they could follow up, be introduced to customers so they could both sit on a call together to get more context on this stuff. And we alternate, right? So 1 month, the GTM team owns the meeting, and they bring us all of their goodies and their context and their feedback. The next time we meet, which is, we do these monthly, the R&D teams come back with responses. Hey, thanks so much for the feedback. This one, and this one are in discovery. So thank you so much. You've set up with these customer calls. We're having conversations with customers. We're capturing their feedback. We're moving forward. But the goal is, when R&D owns it, that they're providing an update. And the update is not always we're building it, right? The update sometimes is we need help on the business case because we just don't see the right ROI for this investment. Or the update is, we're coming up with concepts, but we're not sure which of these really solve the problem. Can we collaborate and connect with customers to get their feedback on some of these things? Or do you have enough context to share your point of view on some of these things? And through these we've done 4 now, I think, since I started. Through these meetings, we've really gotten to a place where people are having better relationships across these teams. It's fostering, so much collaboration that we didn't even foresee necessarily happening. That wasn't like the intended outcome, but there's always these unintended positive consequences that come out of these kinds of initiatives. But in addition to that, we all have a centralized view of what feedback is coming through all of our customer channels, instead of just one of them, or instead of just through our, NPS feedback surveys, etc. So there's a lot of content that's getting pulled together, and all of us are walking away smarter today than we were yesterday about what the state of our product is, how customers are using it, and any feedback that's surfacing.
Now, all right. So I have to ask this question. For the product leaders who are thinking about product leadership roles, or for the product leaders who are coming into a new company, what advice do you have for them?
One, I think it's really important to understand that most executives, most people in an organization, are coming from a positive intent perspective, right? So it's not that the chief revenue officer or the go-to-market teams were trying to gatekeep these things from anybody else in the organization. I've not been in any organization where that's the intent. The intent is always to protect the customer's experience and to limit noise, misinformation, suboptimal experiences that either put the account at risk or put their relationship with that customer at risk, or, in some way, shape, or form could be potentially damaging. And so the first kind of step in any of these investments is always to create trust. And you create trust by creating aligned goals and objectives, right? At the end of the day, I want her team to win, because her team winning means our company is winning, means that the products that we're building are getting used, means that we're all doing our jobs more effectively than we were before. So I want her team to win. 100%. I do not want to put her team at risk. I do not want to damage the relationships. I do not want to get in the way, right? But at the same time, we need some of that context in order to build the right things for customers. Otherwise, it's kind of like that game of telephone, right? Where you hear something from someone, and by the time, the fourth person hears it, you've built who knows what. But it's definitely not what that first person kind of asked for or provided feedback around. And so just aligning on what the goals were and what kinds of questions we want to ask and why we need to have these conversations and how these conversations are going to help us make the best decisions in R&D that is humanly possible, that can then support their teams, was a really kind of important first step in aligning those objectives. And then partnering with them, right? So would I go from 0 to, that's okay, we'll just take a list of customers and my PM team can have those conversations and we don't need you in those calls? No, right? Like, if they want to be in those calls, if they want to create the introduction, if they want to help facilitate, if they want to be the leaders of those calls, absolutely, please help us. You know these customers way better than we do at this point, right? You know their pains, they're calling you regularly, you talk to them about their problems, you've sold them a solution, you fixed like a support issue that they've needed. Absolutely, please help us. Let's work together on this. And then once we have built that trust, if you can't make it to a call and you trust us to be able to lead that call and you don't think it's going to put your, account at risk, we're all in a better place moving forward with intent, with experience, with consolidation together. But that, I think, it's getting to that trust that is that underlying objective that is hard because people bring their previous experiences that aren't always positive to the table. And it takes a little bit of time, just like in any new relationship, to establish those norms and to basically say, that's not how we're going to work together. I promise. And you don't have to just trust me. I will show you. Right.
So Aleks, but I want to double click here because I want to get to the specifics. Because this relates very much to just what we were talking about when there's a new idea, you want to sit down with your stakeholders, bring them along for the journey. Did you start by working directly, like where did this idea come from? And then did you start by working directly with the chief revenue officer and then brought your teams together? Like, can you just specifically, how did that go? And when did you start doing it? Was this early in your first 90 days, or was this after you already created some credibility and trust with the rest of the teams?
That's a really good question. We started this really, really early on. I would say I was at the organization for maybe 30 days. And
Wow.
how this evolved is, at the beginning of this conversation, we started talking about building those relationships. And so for me, the first step was, as I come into an organization, what is my list of people to talk to? Representation across all of the business functions. So can I talk to some people in finance? Can I talk to some people in sales and customer support, in marketing, in product management, engineering, design, anything you could possibly think of? I have at least 2 people on my list of people to talk to that are representative of each of those organizations. And honestly, what happens is I will often ask a question at the end of each of those sessions, which don't have to be super long. 15, 30 minutes is perfect. Spend a couple of minutes getting to know the person, on a person-to-person basis, nothing work-related, and then spend the bulk of your time on the work-related things. But focus on what's getting in the way for them. How can you help them? What's a blocker for them, right? How would they like for, your relationship with them or the, R&D team or product team's engagement with the rest of the organization to be different or change or adjust or help them more in some significant way. And I often ask this question, which is, who else should I talk to? Who else do you think it would be valuable for me to hear from? And almost every single time people will give me yet another person. So like your first layer is, let's call it 30-ish people, right? And then your second layer, you're adding a few more. And I think this can feel exhausting to some people, but it's so worth it because you learn so much that is going to either help you or prevent you from making a misstep in a particular direction if you spend the time to do this. And it was in those conversations that I started to pick up across the board to a person in the GTM team that they felt like over the last, I don't know how many years, they were providing feedback, but they didn't have clarity as to where that feedback was going. They didn't know whether it was being used. They didn't know how it was being supported. They didn't know who to go to. They didn't know which PMs were working on what things. They had very murky perceptions of R&D and didn't really know how to engage and didn't know where the feedback they were providing was going. And so that kind of started a thought process for me, which is like, okay, so then I would probe. Tell me about your experiences around how do these ideas that come either from customers or from you or from somewhere, some other source, how do they become product experiences? And so like question by question, you start to unravel that there is a gap here in the sense that like there's not a clear understanding by the GTM teams of how R&D works, what to expect, how their feedback is being used, all things that are solvable through communication, right? And so after having multiple conversations that were like this, I kind of had a one-on-one with Kristen and I said, hey, here's what I've heard from members of your team. Do you agree with this? Yes or no? And how serious do you perceive this challenge or opportunity to be? Right. And then she tells me that she does perceive it that way and that it is a serious challenge. I'm like, great. This is helpful. Not great. Right. Because like it's not some of these challenges are not awesome. Right. But great that at least we're aligned. You have consistency and that you believe that this is a serious problem. How much do you want to engage in helping to resolve some of this? Do we want to create an approach that could help us address these things? And here's the things that I think we could potentially address. One is getting clarity, alignment, and an understanding of how R&D works and how the feedback that GTM can provide to R&D gets worked in that system with consistent updates and context and decisions and reasons for those decisions. So it doesn't feel like it just goes into the ether and it never comes out the other side. And she was like, that would be awesome. Let's do that. And so we started to map out with some key members of her team and some key members of my team what this potential solution could look like. And we looked at tools, we looked at ceremonies, we looked at content, we looked at a lot of different things. And we had our, short-term solution, long-term solution, midterm solution, all those things kind of mapped out. And so this one felt like the best short-term thing we could do. It is an ask to ask all of the GTM teams to pull the requests and be able to talk about them and, centralize them for the R&D teams. And it just shows the good kind of grace and that they brought to the table, even in this space where they felt like their feedback wasn't being actioned consistently and they didn't get clarity, that they would still be willing to go and pull this content together so they could reach out another branch to kind of pull that collaboration together, which I just can't say enough positive things about. But I think that people will find goodwill when they look for it, right? And so especially if people feel aligned that you're working on the same side, on the same problem, and you're both trying to solve it, even in scenarios like this, where I would imagine that to be an unlikely outcome, right? That they're going to be willing to put in extra work to help us understand yet again what their feedback might be, that they were willing to do it. So it was just such a good start to that kind of collaborative opportunity of bridging these two teams and their challenges and opportunities together. And I would say it's such a fast turnaround, what an impact something like that can have, right?
And I feel like this goes back to your just first point of the importance of treating your first 90 days like a product. Because what I heard you say is you're using these discovery conversations to find the jobs to be done, the unmet needs, and the jobs to be done from the perspective of what jobs can the product team solve for my stakeholders in order to build that credibility, to build that trust, build those relationships. That's I think that's very actionable and very necessary to put in that work. So, Aleks, how can people find you or connect with you after this podcast?
Absolutely. LinkedIn is probably the place where I spend the most amount of time outside of work and family. So LinkedIn would be a great spot to connect with me. And please do. I love talking about all things product management, being a woman in tech, research. If anyone has any research topics, love doing that as well. So please feel free to connect, DM me. Love to have some conversations.
Great, Aleks. Thanks so much for sharing your insights into product management and product leadership. For everyone else, thanks so much for joining into Productside Stories. I hope today's stories have inspired you, and I encourage all of you to please continue hearing the podcast. Visit us at productside.com for more free resources, including webinars, templates, playbooks, and other product wisdom repackaged for you. My name is Rena Alekson, and until next time, keep innovating, keep inspiring, and keep creating stories worth sharing. Thanks, everyone.